Hi, my name is Dr. Amy Muise. I'm a relationship and sexuality researcher and professor of psychology.
Oh, you can read minds? Why do I feel this way?
What is therapy like? How does the brain really work?
Let's find out. Hosted by Tolu Faromika, giving brain fuel for curious minds. You're tuning into the BrainCore podcast. Welcome to BrainCore, the podcast that shows you what's possible with psychology. I'm Tolu, your host, and love is in the air, so let's talk about it. Valentine's Day is coming up soon, and so on our timelines, we're going to see a lot of posts about how to make sure you're compatible with someone else based on their love languages, trying to figure out if this person is the one, and all of these things are a lot of fun. I know that I've also had fun doing some of these things as well, but something that's more fun is relationship science, and we can actually learn a lot from relationship experts, and so that's what we're going to do today. I am joined by Dr. Amy Muise, a relationship and sexuality researcher. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today. And I wanted us to kind of start with some myth busting. So a phrase that comes up often in conversation and in popular media is the phrase, happy wife, happy life. And I kind of already see you smiling about it. But research kind of paints a different picture. So could you describe that picture for us?
Yeah, sure. So one of my colleagues, Matt Johnson, he led a study where we actually tested this claim.
Okay.
So this idea that in relationship science, it's the idea that women are the barometers of the relationship. So this idea that women's satisfaction matters more for future satisfaction. So what we did was we had over 900 couples where we had daily reports of their relationship satisfaction, and then another sample of almost 3,500 couples who had annual reports of their relationship satisfaction. And these were man-woman couples. And we looked at whether, at times when they had higher relationship satisfaction, if that predicted more satisfaction in the future. And then we tested whether there was a gender difference. So trying to get at this idea of, does women's satisfaction matter more for future satisfaction? And we found no gender differences.
Oh, wow.
Both partners' satisfaction mattered for the future of their relationship. And, of course, in some ways that's very intuitive, but it definitely challenges this notion of happy wife, happy life. So we propose that maybe we should start to think about it as something like happy spouse, happy house.
I like that.
Yeah, it's not just about women. And, I think there's some of these like relationship ideas that we see, on TikTok or on social media, they can seem harmless and fun. Yeah. But I think this idea that, it's women's satisfaction that matters actually inadvertently puts more responsibility for the health of the relationship onto the woman partner. And then it also suggests that men's satisfaction doesn't matter. And that's just not true. Yeah. So I think even when these things are sort of fun and harmless, it's good to think about, what we would actually find when we test this properly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting finding. And I love that it was studied so empirically and like we actually have data. And I wonder if the phrase is also convenient, like, because sometimes there is this discourse online of, the burden of, the house and taking care of things and the relationship kind of being on the woman, like she ultimately is deciding. And yeah, I don't know, like, I wonder if there is like a convenience factor there to saying happy wife, happy life, like, almost like I don't have to do much to contribute there.
There's so many gendered ideas about relationships, and sometimes those just perpetuate some of these ideas that, actually place like more emotional labor on women or, burden one partner with a responsibility that, really should be shared. Yeah. And can also overlook, the men's satisfaction, right? And implying that, those types of, relational and emotional expressions are not important for men, right? And we know that that's not true. So, sometimes those ideas are perpetuated and they can actually lead to some harmful dynamics in relationships.
Yeah, I was going to say that, you kind of mentioned that they are harmless on the surface, right?
Yeah.
But then underneath, they can also be driving this really harmful cycle also of kind of putting that emotional labor on the woman. And also kind of disregarding like the man's satisfaction as well. Like that's also important in the relationship. So I'm glad that we have busted that myth. And whenever we kind of start talking about fairness and satisfaction in relationships, the conversation sometimes goes towards intimacy. And part of that is sex, right? And when it comes to sexual satisfaction, there are also a lot of beliefs about the frequency and the timing. So I wanted us to start off with the frequency. So what should couples actually take from your research on sexual frequency?
Okay, I'll share a couple things. So one of our earlier findings related to sexual frequency, so we had a large nationally representative study in the US that we were able to access the data from. And this was of like 30,000 people. And we were able to look at how sexual frequency was related to like how satisfied people felt with their relationship and even their life as a whole, so their overall well-being. And essentially what we found was that couples who engaged in more frequent sex, they did report more relationship and life satisfaction, but this seemed to level off at a frequency of about once a week. So couples who were having sex more frequently than once a week weren't happier than couples having weekly sex. So I always think the takeaway from that work is, for most couples, again, all of our research is looking sort of at these averages, right? There'll be people who have different experiences, of course. But what I usually take away is that for most couples, some form of regular intimacy is likely important for their satisfaction, but they don't need to aim to have sex at these very high frequencies that are more characteristic of the early stages of a relationship, when couples are first together. So I think that finding can be a little bit reassuring for some couples that they don't necessarily need to aim to have sex as frequently as possible, but that if you can, sort of aim for like, weekly, for most couples, it'll be somewhere in that range, then that's probably going to be a good sort of relationship maintenance. But of course, it's not just about how often you have sex, right? It's about how those experiences are and how satisfied you feel with them. So in other work, we've also shown that when people feel more sexually satisfied, so when they're enjoying their sex life more, that actually leads to more frequent sex rather than the reverse. So this idea that when you're able to have these, better, more pleasurable sexual experiences, that's actually helping to facilitate the frequency. And then finally, when we've looked at couples' frequency and their relationship satisfaction, we sort of create these different profiles of couples to see, how some of these factors look together. We do see that the majority of couples who are highly satisfied are having regular sex. And again, this is sort of in the range of once a week. 3 times a month to about once a week. So again, not daily, but still maintaining sort of that regular connection, because that is one way that couples, many people express intimacy, feel close to their partner, connect. So that, I would say, is kind of the general takeaway messages from the work that we've done.
That's really cool. So we're kind of seeing that you don't have to kind of put that pressure on yourself to be sexually intimate so many times a week, like finding those moments to connect, and also the quality of that intimacy.
Yeah, because I think engaging in more frequent sex that you're not enjoying or not wanting, or you're doing it sort of out of obligation, probably isn't going to be good for your satisfaction, right? And that's not to say that there's times certainly when might not be exactly what you wanted to do, but you want to connect with your partner, and then oftentimes like couples get into it and you're sort of glad that you had that time to connect. But if you're sort of engaging in a lot of sex that's not enjoyable, that's probably not. So thinking about both of those things, making more time for intimacy, but also communicating with your partner around that satisfaction.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I was curious whether there was this flip side of, like having too much sex and like not, feeling satisfied. And okay, so what about the timing? I know that, a lot of couples worry about planning sex and kind of that making it less romantic and maybe it is kind of seen as like an obligation or a chore or something. So is there any evidence for planned versus spontaneous sex?
Yeah, and beliefs about this are one of the biggest differences that we've seen in my lab. So people just overwhelmingly believe that spontaneous sex, like sex that happens sort of without any planning, is more satisfying than sex that's planned or scheduled ahead of time. So people have this really strong belief that spontaneity is better. And so we've tested this in a few ways. We first started by surveying couples in their daily lives, and when they had sex, we just asked them the extent to which it was planned ahead of time or spontaneous. And we actually, this is another myth we can bust, because we actually found that there was no difference in the sexual satisfaction depending on whether couples had planned it ahead of time or whether it had happened spontaneously. So no difference at all. They were both, I think people, once they were engaging in sex, like they were with their partner, these were primarily, happy couples, that it was satisfying regardless. And so we started to wonder if we could shift people's beliefs about this, right? If they really think that spontaneous sex is better, but the evidence is suggesting that it's not, what would happen if we shifted people's beliefs towards seeing planned sex as also satisfying? Could that lead to, maybe even more sex, right? Because for couples who might struggle, to find the time, planning could help with that. So what we did really recently was we recruited a sample of parents with young kids, because we figured they would be a group that maybe struggles with spontaneity, right? They, may struggle to find time for sex and intimacy. And so for half of them, we gave them this information about these benefits of planned sex, that a lot of people think spontaneity is better, but, we actually don't have evidence for that, and there can be these benefits to planning. And so we sort of tried to shift their beliefs, and then we encouraged them to plan sex with their partner over the next 2 weeks. And they were just compared to a group of couples where we kind of affirmed their existing beliefs, which we know are typically that spontaneous sex is better. And we followed them over just for 2 weeks. But what we found was that the people in our planned sex group, they had more sex, and they actually had more desire for sex.
Oh, wow.
So I think that it gave them this time to anticipate, right? So if they'd sort of planned it, they could text with their partner throughout the day. They could look forward to it, right? And they could get prepared, especially for these busy parents. Some of them, we also had some open-ended responses so we could learn more about their experiences. And some of them said, in our busy lives, sometimes, my partner will initiate sex at the end of the day and I'm just not prepared for it. And I'm not feeling good about myself. I'm not wearing what I want to wear. I'm not, my hygiene isn't what I want it to be. And then I was feeling obligated and, I didn't really want to, but I didn't want to let down my partner. But the planning seemed to help them get in a mental space where they could look forward to it, they could prepare for it, and it actually helped them find more time for intimacy. So they had 28% more sex than our control group. And that's only over 2 weeks. So ideally, we'd want to, follow people over time and see how that goes. But it definitely seems like a belief worth challenging. And for a lot of couples, especially if they're finding that they have trouble, initiating or finding time to connect as much as they'd want, planning seems to be a viable option.
Yeah. And I mean, we were talking about this briefly before we started recording also. But we were talking about travels, right? And I kind of see a similarity between the two, right? Like, of course, it's amazing to have a spontaneous trip and be like, okay, like this evening we're going to like Niagara Falls or we're going to, I don't know, the Bahamas or something like that. And there might be a part of you that's like, I haven't packed, like I haven't done all these things. Like I maybe wanted to buy some outfits that would have been great for the trip, And then there's planning a trip, like maybe in months in advance, and that you're going to the Bahamas, and so you've been able to plan. Like, I don't know, like I'm seeing a similarity there. It's like, of course you'd be excited because now you've had some time to prepare. And
That's the exact analogy we use, right, to
Oh,
challenge
okay.
these beliefs. So we say to people, think about, like, it's trying to challenge this idea that spontaneity is better, right? We don't think spontaneity is better for a lot of other things, right? And we do that, right? Like, think about it, like the last vacation you took. Most people spent at least some time planning for it, preparing for it. And we don't think of that as making it worse, right? We often think of that as potentially making it better, right? Making sure that we have the kind of vacation that we want to have, right? And so it could be like that with sex, right? If you're planning ahead, it seemed like this could also allow couples to talk about not just that they're going to have it, but what they want to do, right? And get prepared in a way that they can feel good about, right? If there's like toys that they want to use or a setup that they want to have, or they want to make sure to arrange for privacy or wear something that they feel really sexy in, like they can have that time to do that.
Yeah.
And
Childcare.
Childcare, exactly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also just like it gives them a chance to talk realistically about like when should we actually plan for this, right? Because sometimes you might think of if you're both just exhausted at the end of the day and it just never happens, and maybe you want to rethink like, okay, that's not working for us. So are there other times that we might have those opportunities and could plan for? So yeah, we've been trying to disseminate this information because we think this is sort of like a quick thing that we can debunk and actually get couples to think like a little bit differently about, and it seems to have an impact when they do.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a really good solution, especially when you have busy schedules, and then you also have kids, and so taking all of those things into consideration.
Yeah, definitely.
So part of what kind of shapes all of this is also our beliefs about desire itself and who is supposed to want sex more and when. So what do we get wrong about sex drives across genders as well?
Yeah, I mean, part of what we hear, right, is that, men are always sort of ready for sex, men have higher desire. And the truth is, on average, we do see that in our data, especially in long-term relationships. Like, on average, we'll see that men tend to report higher desire than women. But when we take a deeper look, we see a couple of other nuances that are important, right? So if we just take like an average, in general, how often do you desire sex or how strong is your sexual desire? We do see these average gender differences. When we look at this like in daily life, when we can see these fluctuations, we see a lot of fluctuations between both men and women, right? Where some days they have higher desire, some days they have lower desire, right? And this can depend on a lot of things. And then when we look at desire discrepancies, although when there's a discrepancy between desire within a couple, if it's man-woman couples, the man usually has the higher desire, but about a third of desire discrepancies, women in the relationship have a higher desire.
Okay.
So I think having these generalities about who has higher desire and who has lower isn't always helpful, right? It might make couples kind of lean on these stereotypes instead of actually talking about their true feelings, right? Because I think what that does is, men will not be in the mood for sex sometimes, right? And if we think that that's somehow weird or unusual, like a partner might take that in the wrong way, or that might not be respected in the way that you'd want it to be respected. And I think that sometimes like women will be the higher desire, right? And that we want to also represent that experience. So I do think we have gendered ideas about desire that are definitely in some ways supported by the data, but there's a lot more nuance to it. And I think sometimes leaning on those too hard can prevent couples from actually talking about their own personal experiences outside of, maybe what we think of as some of the gendered norms.
Yeah. And so I don't know if do you have any thoughts about maybe where these ideas also came from? I know we're also seeing it in the data, and of course there's nuance there, but any thoughts on that also?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about like traditionally, right, I mean, women's sexuality has been sort of suppressed, like more so than men's. Like men, when we think historically, and even, different parts of the world, right, men's sexuality can sort of be acknowledged more, valued more. And women, that hasn't always been the case. So I think in some ways those kinds of ideas have set us up to think about sexuality in those ways. But then you're right. I mean, there are some true differences there. I think one of the things that is a little unclear, right, is how much of those are actually due to biological differences versus how we're socialized, right? At least some of it is coming from how we're socialized, right, to think about sexuality, to talk about sexuality. And there's gendered messages around that, even still. So, you know, in thinking about maybe there are some sort of innate gender differences in sex drive, but there's definitely some of it, right, that is being socialized through these messages that we still hear.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you also brought up the biological piece, because as you were talking, I was thinking, you know, like women are also kind of going through these different stages in life, like premenopause, menopause, pregnancy, post-pregnancy, and there will be changes in sex drive. And so I was also thinking about this because I've also had the chance to talk with some couples therapists, and they kind of say amongst them that there's this belief that couples will not bring up sex in therapy until the therapist asks. And then all of a sudden it's like they have so much to say. And so I think it's kind of connected to this idea of there being like I don't know if it's like a shame or a stigma about talking about one's sex drive or sexual preferences. And so just talking about that openly, and even in a private setting of like therapy. And I'm wondering, like, what would you say to that?
It's definitely challenging. I mean, sex is still somewhat of a taboo topic that we don't talk about as freely as other topics. Even, you know, sometimes with the people that we're having sex with, we don't always feel comfortable expressing like our likes and dislikes and fantasies and those kinds of things. So, you know, to a therapist that you're maybe just getting to know, you know, it can be difficult to like bring up these things. I mean, I think it's good that therapists are asking and sort of creating that space to talk about those kinds of things, because that communication is going to be important. Like, you know, we're talking today about, you know, the importance of sort of maintaining some sort of regular connection, you know, having more satisfying sex. And, you know, a route to that is being able to not only know, but communicate like what you're interested in and what you want to do. And, you know, even like the planning that I just talked about, like that involves some kind of sexual communication, right? And I think part of the reason that we see some of those benefits is that it sort of maybe opens that door a little bit to say a bit more, not just when you're going to have sex, but what you're going to do and what you might want to do. But I think, you know, it's not even like our sex education in schools. We do have it, right? But there's still a lot of limitations, I guess. And so it's still something that I think people struggle to talk about more openly.
No, when you mentioned that, I was thinking back to like my sex education time in high school, middle school. And most of the time it's kind of, they're talking about like prevention of certain things, and right, and of course like that information is useful, but like no one really introduces you into like communication about these things and what that looks like, and
the pleasure, right, like talking about maybe we'll talk about, you know, condoms, STIs, pregnancy prevention. And, you know, I think now there's more on kind of healthy relationships and, you know, different identities, and all of that stuff is great, but not a lot on pleasure, how to ask for what you want, how to figure out what you want, you know, masturbation, all of those kinds of things that, you know, can be linked to like our sexual pleasure. Those are the things that are, I think, more limited in our sex education. Even with parents, you know, that can be challenging conversations to have with your kids. So then, you know, those people notice the things that don't get talked about as much, and that these might not be things that you can just openly discuss.
And sometimes the things that are unsaid, then it kind of just implies that they are, again, taboo. Like, you're not supposed to talk about that.
Exactly.
So we can't really talk about relationships and love without love languages. I see you kind of rolling your eyes a little bit. But yeah, they're everywhere, you know, like Instagram, TikTok, dating profiles, quizzes.
Yes.
And I think we can't really talk about it without talking about its origins as well.
Yeah.
So they did come from a 1992 book called The 5 Love Languages.
Yeah.
From a Baptist pastor and marriage counselor, Dr. Gary Chapman. And so based on his counseling experience, he identified 5 ways people express and receive love. So we have words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, and physical touch. So, Amy, I'm wondering what's the reality here? So is there any scientific evidence to these 5 love languages?
Yeah, this is a great question. So a couple of years ago, me and some of my colleagues, including Emily Impett from the University of Toronto, we tried to evaluate the evidence for these love languages, right? Because as you said, Gary Chapman developed these, and he just developed these out of counseling couples within like a religious context, right? And so this was sort of, you know, a specific group of couples. He didn't do any empirical research to develop these. He just developed it out of his own experiences. So we wanted to see, would these actually be supported? And so we didn't find evidence for kind of the key claims that he makes. So the key claims would be that there's these 5 love languages that you named, that people have like a primary love language, like a preferred way that they want to be loved, and that when their partner, quote unquote, speaks their love language, so loves them in their preferred way, that's when they're going to feel the most satisfied. So actually, the data suggests that most people don't have a primary love language. All of these things tend to be important to people, right? Which makes sense. So when we think about our romantic relationships, often we probably think about a partner who we spend quality time with, who provides words of affirmation, who we engage with physical touch and intimacy with, you know, who we sometimes exchange gifts with, and who we do acts of service with in terms of like, you know, helping them with things or providing that kind of support, right? And even when people do have a preference, it's a very weak preference. So it doesn't seem like people have necessarily preferred love language. You know, those 5 things are important, but that's certainly not everything that we do to maintain our relationship. So Emily Impett and Sharon Flicker had been looking into this more and found that there's at least 7 to 10 different ways, right? So a couple of the things that sort of get missed by the love languages are things about navigating conflict, providing support to partners, like in challenging times, and supporting the partner's autonomy, right? So supporting their interests, supporting the things that they do outside the relationship. So it seems like those 5 are somewhat limited. And actually, even when people did have like, you know, somewhat of a preferred love language, they weren't more satisfied when their partner, quote unquote, spoke that love language than any of the others. So overall, people tended to be satisfied when their partner engaged in like a wider variety of these things, right? Which makes a lot of sense. Like you can imagine a relationship, you don't only feel satisfied when your partner does, you know, this one particular thing typically. So instead, so in one of the papers where we sort of challenge this, we say, you know, it's not that what we think Chapman sort of gets wrong is this idea that, you know, people have this preferred love language and there's only these ways and that it has to be this match. The things that he names are things that are important, you know, in most relationships. It's just that thinking about it, you know, focused really on figuring out your partner's love language and then speaking that doesn't seem to be where it's at. So we sort of argue that instead of thinking of love as a language, you should think of it as like a nutritionally balanced diet where all of these things are going to be important. And at times, you know, just like with food, right, at times we might need to eat more protein or we might need a particular nutrient or something to meet our needs. And that's true in relationships as well. If we're going through a difficult time, we might need more support. You know, if something good happens to us, we might want our partner to kind of celebrate with us, right? So we need all of these different things. So I think when people are out there, especially because they're on dating profiles
Yeah.
and things like that, that it's definitely shouldn't be a way to select a partner. I think it can be, maybe it can open the door to a broader conversation about the types of things that, you know, make you feel really loved and supported. I think those are good conversation to have. And if the love languages have prompted some couples to have those conversations, that's probably a good thing. But that it shouldn't be so fixed and limited on thinking about a person as having one specific love language.
Yeah, I love how you're getting us to rethink a lot of these beliefs, right, that are kind of spread across social media. Like, first of all, happy wife, happy life, like happy spouse, happy house. And then thinking about love as this very fixed language and rather thinking about it as this balanced diet. Like, I think that's such a important switch in mindset and just in view of and perspective of what love is like and how you can kind of contribute meaningfully to a relationship. Because I think, you know, when you get stuck in this idea that my partner's love language is, I don't know, like receiving gifts, like I'm just gonna keep getting them gifts, and why aren't they happy, you know? But you haven't spent any quality time together, or no acts of service. And I really love those additions by your colleagues of, because I was also like relating to that, right? Respecting your partner's autonomy and like I wonder, like, if you could speak more to that also, like I wonder what that also looks like in relationships now.
Yeah, that's a good question, because, you know, I think when we thought about the love languages originally, we were aware of, you know, the very specific sample that Chapman had based his ideas on, right? These were man, woman, monogamous, religious, heterosexual couples, right? And, you know, who might have had a very specific kind of view of the world or needs in relationships. But you know, I think a lot of partners, you know, you do want someone that's also going to be there, like, during the hard times. And is also going to support you in your endeavors outside of the relationship, right? It's not, you know, only kind of what happens with your partner. So I think kind of broadening that lens and also including those kinds of things, right? Because, you know, obviously how you are with your partner in the relationship is valuable, but also like thinking of the partners as each having, you know, their own other lives and needs, I think can also be important for relationship satisfaction. Yeah,
I think in a way it's kind of respecting the person as like a whole, like two wholes coming together also.
Exactly,
So if not the love languages, what factors should we be paying more attention to? Because I know we've kind of been hinting at these like factors that maintain the relationship. So can you speak more to that also?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, right, these are things, the different love languages, I think, are all things that we should be doing, right? Along with, you know, some of the other things that we've talked about, including like providing support in hard times, right? And celebrating our partner's accomplishments and all of those kinds of things. So I think that a partner who's best able to do that is someone who's responsive. And so in relationship science, we think of like partner responsiveness and perceived partner responsiveness. And this is the idea that you see your partner as someone who understands you, validates you, and cares for you. And that should be a person that can maybe flexibly move through those different expressions of love, right? Can be a little bit in tune to like when you might need support, or, you know, different ways that you might connect, right? And both partners, right? Understanding each other's needs. So I think rather than thinking about like, what is that person's love language, trying to get to know them and seeing the extent to which, you know, they can be a responsive and engaged partner, and maybe, you know, flexibly offer sort of those different kinds of expressions of love.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, as you were talking also, I was kind of reflecting that moving away from this idea of a fixed love language also reduces the pressure also on a person in the relationship to kind of be so I'm going to use the word observant all the time. Like, of course you want to be able to anticipate and observe what your partner might need in that moment. But I think, like, it kind of takes the pressure away of like having to kind of adhere to this one way of connecting with your partner, and kind of saying like, okay, like I actually have this whole toolbox that I could use, right? Like, what might be the best for the situation that's in front of me.
And inviting partners to share that, right? Because we don't want to expect our partner to like read our mind for everything that we need, right? But you know, for people to also invite their partner to engage with them or ask for, you know, different types of support or connection, if that's what they need, rather than, you know, thinking about the way you might feel loved as being one fixed thing. This idea, and also this idea that relationships change over time, right? So even if, you know, you do have a certain preference for some kind of interaction with your partner, as your life changes, that could change and your needs could change, and you want to be able to, you know, to maintain satisfaction. I think you want to be able to, you know, be flexible about that, and also notice your own needs changing and being able to communicate that with your partner.
Yeah. I was on Instagram the other day scrolling, and I came across this creator that I sometimes watch their videos, and it was actually her husband who was speaking in the video, and he was like, I remember when we were first dating, this was your love language, and now like it's completely changed. And I wonder if like it has changed, or if, you know, there's just more of a need for this other, you know, like way of connecting in this season of life, like when they have kids now. And I was also thinking about that earlier, of like, I wonder like how the diet might, you know, like even if we're just talking about food, like it also changes across time what you need. And I wonder if we could also like map that out. Research question.
It's very good, because we know things change over, right? We know that typically desire for sex, right, tends to be higher in the early stage of relationship. And for most people, men and women, it declines over time, right? And women some data suggests that women are particularly impacted by having children, right? That following children, their desire can decline even more starkly than men sometimes, right? So you can imagine, you know, a life when, you know, you're single, maybe you're dating, maybe you have a lot of, you know, free time with a partner. It reasons that your needs and your time together might be different than once you share a home, you share responsibilities, you share children, right? That then maybe all of a sudden different things in terms of sharing household tasks and, you know, providing care in new ways become more important than some of the physical elements, right? So I could see a partner maybe perceives, oh, you wanted, you know, these types of interactions early on in our relationship. Now it seems like you want something different from me. And I think that's probably true, right? That, you know, of course, the nature of the relationship can change over time with, like, I mean, that's a pretty different life from being like single and dating with maybe like your own place and a lot of free time to like sharing all these other kinds of responsibilities. So I think some of that responsiveness and some of that, you know, balanced diet, I think allows a little bit more for those conversations about like changes in the relationship, in both people and needs, and some idea of being like responsive to that.
So I would love listeners to also leave with something optimistic and nice. Like, I know we've busted some myths, but so for Valentine's Day, so I wonder if you could also give people one science-backed reminder about love and relationships. If you were to, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that ties a lot of this together for me is our beliefs about our relationship. So one way that researchers have looked at this is thinking about people who hold these more destiny beliefs, like thinking that compatibility is apparent right from the start, that, you know, if the person's your soulmate, your relationship will sort of be easy and wonderful. versus these growth beliefs that are, relationships take work and effort and being attuned to a partner's needs. And, they see sort of changes or even disagreements as opportunities to grow and learn. So I think this idea of thinking less about relationships as destiny, as, if you find the right person, if you find that soulmate, everything's just going to be easy and wonderful. And instead think about it's like relationships, just like most important things in our lives, do require work and effort to be successful. So this idea that it's important to pay attention to our partner, it's important to be intentional by doing things like planning to make time for those things that are going to make us feel connected, and to put in that time and effort to like really get to know your partner, what they need, what they want, and have that open communication about how you can each be good partners to each other, right? So I think it would be that relationships take work and effort, and often it's worth it, right? For those satisfaction outcomes and really having a partner that can know and understand you and build that solid relationship.
That's an amazing takeaway. I'm really glad that that's the one you chose. But that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Yay. And so to our listeners, were you surprised at all by what you heard today? Let us know in the comments. You can also send us an email directly. Our email is thebraincorepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram @thebraincorepodcast, and we love hearing from you, so please do reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, you can give us a like and also subscribe to the channel. We have a lot more coming out for you, and we hope you have an amazing Valentine's Day. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you are having a great Brain Day.